I'm Kim Taehyeong at the Division of Infectious Diseases. Today I would like to talk about living in interpandemic periods. It's mainly about COVID-19 and it's going to be about the importance of vaccination. The expression coexisting with COVID-19 may sound exhausting or unfamiliar to hospital staffers because it'll mean that there will be increased number of patients. So I'd like to think that this is current situation, a life between the pandemics, dubbed as interpandemic periods. Today I will go over how we will live in the interpandemic periods. This lecture is being recorded at the end of November, so I will tell you that all subject matters are relevant with this timeline. The expression coexisting with COVID-19 may sound like COVID-19 has become as unharmful as a common cold, and we can finally live without wearing masks. But we are doing this job that need to be the most exclusive against the COVID-19. Hospitals cannot coexist with COVID-19 because hospitals have to be absolutely safe. But in this society, we have no choice but to coexist with COVID-19 in the end, even though it's inconvenient. South Korea is not just the country just for doctors, nurses, or people who work in hospitals. Korea is not just for us. There are also people who need help so that they can live with a sense of security. Those who need to make livings, run their businesses like restaurants. It means that they are coexisting with COVID-19 in their lives. But important condition here is that their lives should be with the vaccination. So far, out of all treatments, there's no such thing as game changer as of now. We only have vaccines as a scientific solution, so coexisting COVID-19 means coexisting with the vaccine. During the Japanese occupation, we didn't live under imperial regime because we liked the Japanese people. At the time, we had no choice. But I believe that we'll overcome all this crisis and usher in new days ahead of us. This virus, one of the major characteristics is that I reported on JAMA Internal Medicine regarding this biological characteristics of this virus. It shows the amount of the virus is the same for both people with symptoms and those without symptoms. When we investigated the molecular virus's amount of shedding as a result of PCR test. Professor Jung and Professor Mark Loeb at McMaster University, who was my academic supervisor, we all worked together and we put out a thesis paper, and this paper was selected by BRIC as one of the top 5 papers this year's research achievements in biomedicine. And Professor Jung, one of the lead authors of this paper, had an honor of being featured on a lot of press. It's achievement of our division and a pride of my alma mater, Suncheon University. It's not just for our pride and joy. JAMA Internal Medicine is a very prestigious journal, so our paper was selected the most discussed paper of the year 2021. I bet everyone is curious to know what's all about this pandemic. Why is this virus coming to us, bearing what intention? What is the ultimate motive of this virus? Just like some TV show, is it some kind of God's punishment on our scene, or is this virus punishing us on us? The truth is, it's all irrelevant, regardless if we did something good or bad. If this country is well governed or not, the situation gets better or worse, it's all irrelevant. This virus bears no intention whatsoever. The intention of this virus is only to survive on its own. Viruses are inherently imperfect organisms. Because viruses are imperfect, they select a reservoir animal that could guarantee complete maintenance and amplification. The goal here is to multiply and stay forever in this reservoir animal. That is why viruses usually prefer non-human mammals. From a virus point of view, the most preferred reservoir animals are usually mammals like camel, for example. Bats are also preferred by coronaviruses. Some viruses prefer muscats. So viruses simply want to settle in their reservoir animals. Respiratory viruses are known to be transmitted directly, but dengue virus, which has a case of blood infection, is spread through vector mosquitoes. So in the end, viruses have close relationship with vectors and reservoir animals. That's why viruses usually stay in a particular region. The most viruses infections are limited to a certain region and don't spread to any other regions in nature. However, due to climate change and environmental destruction, such as exploitation of rainforest, sometimes human accidentally becomes the victims of the virus cycle. Viruses unintentionally infect people, and viruses unintentionally cause great pandemics in humanity. Virus has two strategies to survive. There are two kinds of viruses, RNA virus and DNA virus. To compare these two, RNA virus is figuratively very nomadic, and DNA virus is like a settlers in agricultural society. So RNA virus has characteristics of mutational change, and DNA virus is like settlers. In other words, it has case of latent infection in the host cells. RNA virus can change its genetic material quite often. Under the same umbrella of influenza virus, influenza A and B have only 30% of identical genetic material. It means that RNA virus has no sense of ego, so to speak, because only 30% of genetic material is preserved, which means only 30% of genealogy is remaining. It mutates every day. So small mutations cause seasonal flu. Big mutations cause pandemic. For example, only 10% of whole population normally gets infected with flu each year. As herd immunity level increases steadily, it usually increases by 10% each year. By the time the herd immunity fully develops, the scale of the spread gets smaller. So the characteristics of RNA virus is that it causes big mutations. It can cause pandemic at the end, and after this pandemic gradually blows out, the virus causes another mutation, and it creates another pandemic, repeating the whole cycle over and over. On the other hand, DNA virus infects 90% of the population. Case in point, herpes virus. We are all carriers of herpes virus. Almost 95% of the entire population has this virus, and this virus is bound to crop up once our immune system is compromised. So another typical case is varicella zoster virus. A varicella zoster virus, lying latent in ganglion cells, infects our body. When we are young, it gets infected, and then we are older, when our immune system gets compromised, this virus gets wide awake, causing shingles. DNA viruses are in the category of more advanced, more evolved viruses. They are the strain that chose to coexist with us instead of living tiresome mutation cycle like RNA virus. So virus lands on us by one of these two choices. The purpose here is clear: survival. So we humans have responded to virus quite wisely, especially when it comes to respiratory virus. Social distancing and mask wearing are the only answer to this virus. The protocol here is pretty much the same all over the world. Especially US CDC has maintained its advice of mask wearing ever since May last year. The recommendation of mask wearing has been given to pretty much all countries, including South Korea, United States, Australia, and Japan. However, mask wearing may come across a little different depending on the culture. In media outlets, we normally see people in Europe and the US walking around without any mask in public. This is cultural difference. For a long time, Korean people have been in favor of mask wearing. And that's pretty much the same in Japan. Japanese people love wearing masks because we are the same East Asian countries and we share this culture. It's a courtesy not to be a bother or impose on others. So because of this infection and because of this fine dust in the air, and thanks to this culture, people here tend to get anxious when they hear that they become a bother or public menace not wearing masks. So I believe that government's response is reflecting this Korean people's sentiment. Last year, government monopolized mask distribution and sales. So I believe that this kind of measure reflects Korean citizens' sentiment. And in fact, this is one of the positive parts of the government's responding to the situation. There's another thing that the Korean government is trying to push through. I remember Korea had the most PCR tests in the world during the swine flu outbreak 12 years ago. And considering the population and the number of facilities, South Korea has been conducting a fairly large number of PCR tests nowadays as well. Especially the drive-through test started as an idea of an epidemiologist in South Korea. It started at Chilgok Daegu Hospital, and it's now taking place in many public health centers all over the world. And Sun천향 Hospital has been running drive-through tests for U.S. military troops for a while. And we've been pushing forward with testing, contact tracing, and treatment. And it's a fruit of Korea's protection measure strategy and people's effort. However, there was one case that made us all frustrated, feel that there need to be scientific intervention because of the damage that medical institutions had to bear. Before the rollout of vaccine in the beginning of 2021, during the Lunar New Year holiday, the Seoul hospital experienced a large case of in-hospital infection. After that, actually many university hospitals experienced this in-hospital infectious cases. There were only 2 index patients got admitted to the hospital, and the very next day, other 40 people got infected. So we experienced this kind of irresistible spread of the virus this year. In fact, during the pandemic, among the patients who had chronic diseases, once they got infected with COVID-19, they had to pass away. In that sense, hospitals are not safe from COVID-19 because there have been cases where people who wouldn't have died if it had not been for infections in hospital infection. This gave us a lesson that hospitals should never be any lenient towards COVID-19 infection. We used this opportunity to make hospital white paper, and we did our best to improve various vulnerable facilities, such as cafeterias. And this should not be one-time effort. We need to keep trying to make our hospital a lot safer. Now we should talk about Delta variant. And as you can see this graph, the horizontal axis means spread of the virus. The basic reproduction number means the higher the number, the more transmissible. Like chickenpox and measles, they are the strongest virus in terms of that. And the vertical axis means fatality rate. So as you can see, this bird flu, Ebola, SARS, and MERS are the viruses with higher fatality rate. And flu is right here, and COVID-19 coronavirus is right here. So it's more dangerous and more transmissible. So that was the characteristics of coronavirus, and it could last longer because viruses with higher fatality rate cannot move on to other regions. In case of Ebola, it could stay in Africa, killing several hundreds people, but it cannot be pandemic because it doesn't have latency and it cannot make people survive so that they can spread the virus. However, COVID-19 coronavirus has a milder symptom, so it could spread with asymptomatic spread. So it can make people spread the virus without any symptoms. So sadly, there's a Delta variant came up. It's pretty much like measles and smallpox. Sadly, the reason why we have 5,000 confirmed cases nowadays means that we have milder symptom Delta variant. It's almost like a airborne diseases, just like measles. So in case of measles, if it's once has an outbreak in hospital, it could even get spread through floor to floor. So this Delta variant, once it has an outbreak in hospital, it can have a terrifying result. And now we even have Omicron variant. We already had Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and now we have Delta. Now we have Omicron. So I'd like to talk about VOC. It doesn't mean voice of customer, like complaints of customer. It has same acronym, but it means a variant of concern. It means that WHO is focusing on those variants. The key variant used to be the Delta, and now Omicron is emerging to become a variant of concern. We don't know how much it'll affect us, and we are now living in a world of uncertainty. As for this Omicron variant, it makes us have both hopes and concerns. We have concerns because Omicron is spreading across South Africa rapidly. That's very terrifying. Good news is that Omicron has a slower pace when it comes to development into severe cases. Even though we don't know yet, we already looked into surface protein and the form of mutation. And when we looked into this form of mutation, it'll have slower clinical development and this milder symptom. The bigger hope we have, the bigger disappointment we can have. So we have to be careful. But we are hoping that Omicron variant could kick out Delta variant because it could have lower toxicity level, and it could have a similar form of flu or common cold, even though it is not as unharmful as flu. But I believe that if it kicks out Delta variant, I believe that Omicron variant have lower death toll. So some people say that this pandemic won't drag on forever. Now we are going to look into mutative characteristics of each virus. So each circle, as you can see, represents how easily one virus can mutate. Hepatitis C is the most likely mutate. So like hepatitis C, influenza, HIV, their genetic material has this ability to mutate. So coronavirus, especially SARS-CoV-2 here, is like a ability. When we compare that to human, it's like a intelligence. So we measured how intelligent this virus is, how smart it is enough to mutate. So this ability is as small as the small dot here. So it doesn't have that much of ability to mutate. Even though we cannot be sure it won't have any mutant ever, but even though we have Delta variant and we have so many confirmed cases, but we have hope because it won't have that much of ability, just like influenza. So with a lot of mutations, we believe that it'll eventually blow out and it could become less severe. So someday we could walk around street without wearing mask, and all those restrictions are lifted, and this virus could become as unharmful as seasonal flu. That's our hope. However, the problem here is that it doesn't end there. We fear that another type of respiratory virus could come in years to come. So will there be hope in therapeutics? Let's look into this graph. Above here, it represents the number of confirmed cases globally, and down below, it's death per population. So ever since the virus spread in China, it spread in both Europe and the United States. There was a big increase in confirmed cases. We call it the first wave. And we also had a big surge in confirmed cases last summer. It started in Taehyeong, in Gwanghwamun. So Israel and Europe also had a big number of confirmed cases. Third wave started last winter. It was 1 year ago. We call it third wave, and United States, UK, Europe, Israel all had big number of fatality confirmed cases. So both United States and Israel started the rollout of the vaccine. So we had the benefit of the vaccine. So we had a lower number of confirmed cases until this year, April. But unfortunately, we have Delta variant, and it led to another surge. We call it fourth wave. The UK, United States, Europe, Israel all had a big number of confirmed cases. And South Korea also had a big number of confirmed cases ever since July. So we are still under that influence. And now we are seeing the emergence of Omicron virus. And we are not sure if this will lead to fifth wave or not. But one thing we have to look into is that even though we have fourth wave, but compared to the third wave, we have significantly lowered number of fatality. So it was before the vaccination, and ever since the rollout of the vaccine, we have been seeing a lot less cases of death tolls. So despite all the hardship, South Korea is doing really well. And when we see this graph, the government and people in South Korea are doing really well and responding to the situation very well. So we will look into the overall confirmed cases before August last year. And when we look into this graph, red bars here represent overall confirmed cases by each age demographic, and black solid line here represents fatality rate by each age. So about quarter of the confirmed cases in older generation lost their lives, sadly. So ever since spring last year, our hospital also had a lot of older patients who got admitted, and so many people lost their lives in our hospital. However, when we look into the same scale of the demographics, ever since November, thanks to the rollout of the vaccine, we see the significantly lowered death cases from 25% to 10% in older generation. Let's see the graph of the vaccination rate globally with the upbeat music. So Israel started to roll out the vaccine earliest, so it's going up to 40%, 50%, and now the United States and the United Kingdom are catching up. Canada, which the country has a nice welfare system, and it's almost topping the chart. And then Japan is following. South Korean government was quite incompetent when it comes to roll out the vaccine. It started the last, it was almost the bottom. And then South Korea caught up and it's topping the chart when it comes to the vaccination rate. So it's still regrettable that South Korea could have done better. It could have started the rollout of the vaccine earlier, but we are doing really well and we are topping the chart in vaccination rate. So less people were against the vaccine and a lot of people helped, and it wasn't just the cooperation of the Korean people, and it was also the campaign of the government. But I don't think it was possible without the help of medical institution. So it wasn't just military troops that fought against our enemy back in Joseon Dynasty when we had war. There was also militia. All the people fought against our enemy together. So a lot of private university hospitals and practitioners helped with the vaccination. So it was all the fruit of our concerted effort. I bet a lot of people, including our faculty members, university students, residents, are all worried about the side effect of the vaccine. But I would say that vaccine has this inconvenient truth. Let's just say there's a thing called efficacy, as you can see in this picture. Efficacy means that it could have all different effects. Vaccine could have positive effect, but it's not just the benefit. It could also lead to different kind of reactions, such as inflammation, fever, headache, chest pain, indigestion, dizziness, or some women could have menstrual irregularities, or some people could have lymphatic inflammation or different kind of adverse reaction. But among all these reactions, there are some side effects that we have to be extra careful with. For example, anaphylaxis or anaphylactic shocks are the cases that we have to look closely. But those cases usually happen right on the spot, so that's very rare. But and cases of myocarditis or thrombosis, those cases require attention, and people who have these cases have the reason not to take the second dose. However, among all those people who claim their chest pain, they come to our hospital and they take ECG, but we already take 500 or 1,000 electrocardiographies, but there was no case whatsoever that turned out to be the case of myocarditis or thrombosis. So it's like the frequency of 1 in a million. So it's not as common as we could think it could happen in a hospital. I believe that those who come to our hospital, they could claim that they have adverse reaction. They can find underlying diseases that they didn't even know they had. It means that they could find that they had anemia, arrhythmia, or hyperthyroidism, or even they could get diagnosed with biliary tract cancer, or even they could find malignant tumors like hematological tumors. It means that when it comes to vaccine side effects, it is not just because of the vaccine itself. It could be because of their underlying diseases that they didn't even know they had. So they find those diseases once they have this reaction. Paradoxically, you could say that it's a positive effect of the vaccine because of the vaccine, you could find the diseases that you didn't know you had. So I could say that it's a convenient truth, even though there are reliable data and all the credible medical journals are approving the efficacy of the vaccine. There are some adverse reactions because it didn't take 7 or 8 years. It only took 7 months to come up with the vaccine. So it could have more adverse reactions. However, it did really well with the protection of the variant, and it did really well in protecting us from getting any severe symptoms. So even though we have a lower level of efficacy in the vaccine, we need to get vaccinated, and also we need to get a booster shots. That's the conclusion of this science world. And also, antibody testing is not so recommended because we cannot interpret the result, and the protocol could change any moment. So we are not recommending you take antibody tests after you get vaccinated. And there are also some people who say that they cannot get vaccinated because they have a lot of different complications and they have severe diseases, so they get worried. However, I could say that those people with severe diseases are extra vulnerable to COVID-19, paradoxically. So if it's not absolute exception like anaphylaxis, I could say that people with serious diseases have all the right reason to get vaccinated. We are living in South Korea. South Korea had a lot of different battles and wars, but now we are enjoying our peace at the moment. So someday we could have some battles and wars. So we have to prepare ourselves for this possibility. So we have to protect ourselves from this worst scenario, and we have to keep our peace as possible. It's pretty much the same with pandemic. Another pandemic could come to us eventually someday. That's possible. So when it comes to coexisting with COVID-19, it could mean that we are living in interpandemic periods. We are living in uncertainty. So we have to enjoy our lives of today, and hospitals should keep themselves safer, more secure, so that all the staffers and patients could get treated and work in a safe environment. So we have to make this place. I could say that South Korea's healthcare system is pretty much hybrid form because its government-led social security system It's a socialistic healthcare system, but at the same time, 90% of the medical institutions are private. So it's very competitive, efficient market economy medical system. That's why people can have the benefits of many medical resources. They can get treatment while choosing the hospital they want to go. So even though we are struggling now, but in a normal situations, a lot of people with mild symptoms and the patients with chronic diseases, they are enjoying their opportunity to get their hospital rooms. And that's why we can get more beds for COVID-19 confirmed cases. In some sense, with this efficient medical system, South Korean people are able to get treated even though we are struggling with this disastrous COVID-19 pandemic. But at the same time, I would say that a lot of hospitals in South Korea are struggling. They are having a lot of difficulties putting efforts. Some people think that we are treating patients, protecting Korean citizens, all because of our heroism as a medical staffers. However, I'd like to quote a novel called Past. In this novel, there's a doctor, Ryu, who helps people voluntarily. And one journalist comes to this doctor and asks why he's doing all this. Is it because of his heroism? And Dr. Ryu says that it is not because of his heroism. It is not because he tries to look fancy. He says, you might laugh at me, but I only pursue honesty. And the journalist asks, what do you mean by honesty? And Ryu says that it is just serving my duty. It is no big deal. And as a doctor, I totally agree with Dr. Ryu. It is not about flaunting my achievement. It is not about talking about my achievement. It is about treating my patients and protecting my staffers and doing my work. And I believe that all the faculty members in this university are doing their job in their own places. Actually, I don't fear of getting infected. It is not the COVID-19 that I fear. It is just my work that is difficult. Someday, I might be infected with COVID-19. I could get quarantined or I could be a patient. But more than that, I'm more afraid of my empty seat could lead to another difficulty for this hospital to respond to the situation. So, in a sense, we need to concert our effort in a long term. And to do that, there should be proper compensation so that we could pursue our honest calling. I recently read an article, and this news article hit me hard. It says, AlphaGo uses 8,500 times more energy than the Go player Lee Se-dol. When we talk about words like metaverse, AI, we tend to paint rosy picture where all the medical staffers just relax, lay back, and machines to do all the work. However, unfortunately, mankind is playing the role of the most efficient batteries. To explain that, we became the most efficient mammal through the course of evolution. We reached the level of efficiency where we could just use one bowl of rice to work the whole day. It's also known that human uses much less energy to walk 1 kilometer than chimpanzee. It's all a result of evolution. So throughout the whole history of tens and thousands of years, we became number one level battery efficiency. So if all the automated machines come out, we just think that we could just lay back and just relax and machines will do the work. And actually, we spend less energy than the machines. I drew these pictures on the batteries. The small battery wears an armor and becomes a big battery doing the work. It reminds me of me being the battery. I work as a doctor treating COVID patients, AIDS patients, and I realized that I should not be whining and I should feel pride in my work, being the battery, burning energy to do its work. Because of us, many patients could live their lives, so I decided to think positively. To make our hospitals better, safer, more secure, I believe that we need to build a system where people can get better rewarded for their work. I cannot make any prediction on this virus. I'm not a fortune teller. I can't see where this virus goes medically. However, one thing for sure is that this virus does not exist because of the failure of our government. It is not because of the government is doing so well we are warding off this virus, or vice versa. Some people might say that some other countries are doing so well, why we are doing so poorly? Or some people say that other countries are doing so bad and we are doing so well. That's meaningless because the concept of this virus is very microscopic, but all those government policies are very macroscopic, so we cannot see where it's going. We cannot overcome the crisis. But I believe that one day the virus will go away at some point. In that sense, I believe that we will live without wearing any mask someday. However, there will be one point where we get to have another pandemic. It is like we get to enjoy peace between wars. So there could be inter-pandemic periods. So some people praise South Korea's virus protection measure. However, the core of this virus protection measure is not just the policy, but also all the people in the medical institution helped and the cooperation. So just like people fought for the country during the war, I believe that every person helped and they have to be proud of their effort. So all the medical staffers fear of leaving their seat when they get infected. So whenever I see them fear of getting infected, I believe that all those medical staffers should get rewarded for their work so that they could put more effort in the system. This wraps up my presentation. Thank you for listening. I hope faculty staffs, medical specialists, doctors, nurses, students, all the experts, all work together to overcome this crisis. Thank you very much.